Hey, what's up, guys? This is Marseille, aka the Property Pastor with Kingdom and Legacy Builders, where our mission is to help everyday people like you and me to build a lasting legacy for our children and our children's children using real estate investing and wealth building principles. Today, I'm going to talk about seller financing with a balloon payment on the end of it. Now, I've used this method in my business to help me acquire several properties. I've actually purchased 4 properties using this method, and it's actually helped me to scale my business quickly over the past 4 years. It's allowed me to create some really good gains in my business, to acquire properties with very little money down, oftentimes no money out of my pocket when it's all said and done. And I want to share some of those tips with you. I'm going to add this tool to your toolbox so that you can use this in your business to build that legacy. But before we get started, before we dig into the content, I want to ask you to make sure that you like this video. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. If this channel is blessing you, if it's adding value to you, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like the video, and even share it with somebody else who needs to hear it, because we're bringing tools, we're bringing tips every single week to help people to build that legacy using real estate. So I've been an investor since 2017. So just right now, I'm about to celebrate my 4-year anniversary in September. Been able to purchase 12 properties, and seller financing has been a key to my business, and I want to share with you what I've learned. So let's dig into it. What is seller financing? So seller financing is essentially when the seller carries the mortgage for the property, right? The seller is going to carry the mortgage for the property. So instead of you going to the bank to purchase it, your seller actually carries the mortgage note, and you essentially pay them every month instead of paying the bank, right? So in simplistic terms, you're going to be paying the seller, right? The seller's going to say, okay, this property is $100,000. The mortgage payment is $400, $500, whatever. So instead of you sending that to Wells Fargo, instead of you sending it to your bank, you're going to pay it directly to the seller, right? So seller financing has been really cool for me. And today I want to give you kind of a slight variation, because oftentimes when people think of seller financing, they think that the seller has to hold onto that note for 30 years, 25 years, or whatever. But a balloon is a really good tool, a really good tip that I've used in my business to help me work with some of the people that I purchase properties from, who maybe don't want to carry it out for that whole term, but they may be willing to carry it out for 3 years, 5 years, so on and so forth. So the balloon, right, basically what happens with a seller finance balloon payment is that the seller says, I'm going to hold onto this note for a term. Remember, that term might be 3 years, maybe 5 years, maybe 10. And at the end of it, whatever the balance is left on the loan, now that becomes due to the seller, right? So you've got to come up with that money. Now you may be thinking, well, where in the world am I going to come up with that amount of money? Let's say, for example, it's a $100,000 balloon payment at the end of it. Where am I going to come up with that? What you do is you refinance the property at the end of the term. Now, typically you're going to start, early enough so that, you're not last minute or whatever. But the nice part about it is when you're working with sellers, often if you're a little bit over, you run over by a few months because you're in underwriting or your bank's closing, whatever, they typically have no problem with that. You've already been paying them mortgage payments for 3 years, 5 years, even 10 years. Another few months is not going to hurt anybody. So let's talk about some of the pros of using seller finance balloons. First of all, there's no dealing with the bank up front. So when you go buy the property, it's basically you, your seller, title company, right? Those are the key players. So there's no dealing with the bank. You don't have to go through underwriting. You don't have to sign tons of paper, stacks of paper, sign your signature, 5,000 times or whatever. So you don't have to deal with the bank. Additionally, it doesn't show up on your credit report. So that's really cool, right? So if you're going to try to apply for some other financing, you don't have to fight with the bank. I mean, you don't have to fight with the credit agency showing up, all these different mortgages in your name. On top of it, sellers often have very few underwriting conditions for you, right? They're not going to be checking to make sure that, you haven't bought anything in the last 60 days. They're not going to make sure you haven't opened up new credit. They don't care about, how long you've been employed on your job. None of that, right? So oftentimes sellers don't have much in terms of underwriting requirements. But then also sellers are typically very flexible on terms. Remember, I mentioned it might be 3 years, it might be 5 years, could be upwards of 10, right? So the length of the loan, that's flexible. The interest rate is flexible. And even the structure in terms of its principal and interest or interest only, we'll talk about that here in a second. They're very flexible there as well. And then the closing is very quick, right? You don't have to go through this underwriter and their manager and their manager's manager and their manager's uncle's cousins, best friends, all that kind of stuff. Closing is really quick. So there's the amount of paperwork is much less, and the steps are much quicker with this. So I love seller financing. Like I said, I've done 4 deals this way. So how do you pay off your seller? So as I mentioned earlier, when the term is up, you're essentially going to refinance. Now you might be saying, well, Marseille, that sounds like a lot. How do I go and refinance this property? Trust me, refinancing a property is a lot easier than purchasing the property. So the bank, when they've seen that you've been paying, your payments to the seller for all this amount of time, the refinancing process for them is a lot simpler, right? So it's a pretty easy process. I've done it a lot of times throughout my career, and what I find is that when I'm buying up front versus when I am refinancing, they're very different. A lot of the refinance focus tends to shift towards the property a lot more. There's a lot less paperwork, and banks treat it totally different because you're no longer, so the bank is not as worried because the property has been performing. So if you've held on to it for all that amount of time, it's past whatever their seasoning requirements are. You've been paying your payments on time every month. Refinancing is a lot easier than buying up front. And then on top of that, one bonus that I've added to my toolbox in the last deal that I just did was I'll go back to my seller and actually convert my seller into a private money lender, right? So the seller knows that I've paid them over the course of the term, 3 years or whatever the case is. Every month they got paid, right? So why not take a portion of that 100,000, 150 or whatever it is and loan it back to me, right? So they can loan it back to me. Again, doesn't show up on my credit report. And then I can also use that private money to invest in other deals, right? So you've kind of taken this relationship, right, shown a strong track record, and now you're kind of leveraging that to borrow additional money from that original seller. So that's a really nice concept, because with the balloon, what often happens is the seller is not willing to hold on to it for 25, 30 years. But they will in turn lend you money back for oftentimes another 5 years, right? Or other deals. So you can always convert this seller into a private money lender as well. So how do you structure these deals? So typically these kind of deals are structured as either principal and interest, or they are structured as interest only. Now both of them have pros and cons. If you're doing an interest only structure, what will happen is you're only going to pay interest on that loan. Now, so the principal doesn't pay down over time. Now, the nice part about that for you as the investor is that your monthly payments are much lower. So you can cash flow better during the early part or during the balloon, the seller finance portion, and you can pocket that money, reinvest that money, or whatever you decide to do. And this is very important, especially if you are making improvements to the property. If you're trying to get bad tenants out, if you're trying to make improvements in terms of forced appreciation, making upgrades, renovations, and things like that, keeping those payments low is probably a good idea. But on the other side, the principal is still out there, right? The principal is not going down. So at the end of it, you've got to pay that whole amount, and anything you paid in interest during that time didn't necessarily benefit you. Now, you can still deduct that on taxes and things like that, but in terms of your principal pay down, you won't take advantage of that during that time. Now, if you do principal and interest, right, you're getting the benefits of a traditional loan where the balance is going down over time, but you're going to sacrifice cash flow. Now, if you buy like a fourplex, for example, and then you buy it and 2 units are vacant or they got really bad tenants, during that time where you're trying to clean up the property, then what you're going to deal with is low cash flow during that time. So it may be kind of lean during that time frame. But I think both of them have their pros and cons. And the wonderful part about the seller financing with balloons is that you can structure them however on whatever works for you and for your seller. So the next question is, where do you find these deals? It sounds so great. Where do you find them? You're not going to find this, on MLS. You're not going to find these kind of deals typically on Zillow. You're not going to find it, just by just going in and searching for properties available near you. You may find some stuff like this on, Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist and stuff like that. But typically in the off-market space is where you find them. So you typically that means you're going to be either networking with other investors, networking with tired landlords, things like that, just making contacts with people. Additionally, you may find them just through direct contact. So I've done a little bit of both. Some of my seller finance balloons have come through people I already knew, other investors, people trying to offload properties, and some of them have come from marketing campaigns. They've come through like driving for dollars and things like that. Typically, these are relationship-based types of deals. So the further removed you are, sometimes the more difficult it is to actually line these up. And then on top of that, you might even find one through a wholesaler, right? So a wholesaler, may be bringing a deal that way. What I find with wholesalers is a lot of times when they're doing that, the rates that you're going to pay the seller are going to be much higher. So my ideal type of person for this kind of deal is somebody who's got maybe 1 or 2 properties either tired landlord, either frustrated landlord, right? Somebody who doesn't need this big cash payment right away. So those kind of folks are ideal for this type of deal. And then on top of it, if you can, at the refinance phase, if you can actually turn around and turn them into a private money lender, it's a win-win, right? So I love these kind of deals. I think they work great. So I hope you give this a shot. If you got questions, make sure you drop them in the question section. You got comments, drop them in the comment section. We actually do videos on some of our questions that we get. Some of the questions that folks give me, I'll actually do new videos on them. So if you got questions, drop them in the question section. Drop your comments there as well. I pray this has been a blessing to you. I pray you've benefited from it. If you haven't done so, right now, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you hit that share button. We're dropping new content every single week to be a blessing to you as you build your business. God bless you. Thanks so much for tuning in. I can't wait to see you again soon.